Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do. To educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Welcome to the show. Today we are back to our regularly scheduled program. We're going to be doing some mindset stuff. We just finished a whole course on the female metabolism, and now I want to kind of get back into the next level human stuff and talk about something that is critical, and I know that is on a lot of our minds, and this is the idea of thinking and good thinking. Now you might say, Jade, why are we talking about good thinking? The reason why is because there's been an awful lot of bad thinking. And when I say good thinking, I mean thinking process, and I also mean thinking in a way that is good for humanity. So not just the ability to think clearly and think intelligently and think in a useful way to solve problems, but also to think in a way that is favorable for our own personal growth and the evolution of humanity. We have seen that poor thinking, conjecture, conspiracy, assumptions, all of these types of things, misinformation, can cause a lot of damage. And so when we talk about the idea of how to be a next level human, and just briefly, I always like to do some review here: a base level human, a culture level human, and a next level human. This is the sort of 3-part construct of the next level human framework that I have developed. And this particular framework essentially says that we are always all 3 of these types of humans. We can never truly be a next level human. We are always just aspiring to be, because we have these base level components, these culture level components, and our next level component. And all of these have use. The idea is that when we are operating from our next level human selves, we are not destructive in nature. We are not seeking power and trying to win like a base level human might. We're not seeking popularity and trying to fit in like a culture level human might. Instead, we're seeking purpose, and we're seeking to grow ourselves and positively impact the world. This is essentially what purpose is. This is essentially what we're talking about when we talk about good thinking. How would a next level human think in a way that would grow themselves, help them learn, and also evolve the world? And so I'm going to start with a little bit of an example here to give you an idea of the thought process here. So let's imagine, and actually this comes from an interview I watched several years ago on one of the news channels. I believe it was CNN or something like that, where they were interviewing a military person and a scientist. And they were interviewing the military person, an Air Force major or whoever he was, because the Air Force and the military services had just released footage of a UFO. This idea that they had true military footage of an unidentified flying object that was captured by a couple Air Force fighter pilots. And they were talking about the idea of what is this thing? And you could see right away in the way that the military person was talking about this unidentified flying object, and the way that this CNN correspondent was talking about it versus the way the scientist was talking about it. The military person was very much base level in the way they came at it. They were essentially saying this has capabilities we're not aware of. We need to be afraid of this. We need to develop our infrastructure and figure out what this technology is and who's behind it and what harm it can do to us and how to protect ourselves and all these kinds of things. And of course, the CNN anchor was coming at it more from sort of the culture level point of view, trying to figure out how is the audience going to sort of perceive this. And most people would say that CNN is, and I don't know if it was CNN, by the way, but let's just say it was CNN or maybe Fox News or whatever it was, but they were coming down more on the side of whatever audience they were speaking to, essentially people pleasing or trying to ask questions in a way that were creating ratings and making it exciting and asking the questions that would get people to watch and pay attention. So it was a popularity way of coming at this. And of course, the scientist came at this in a very unique way. So I want to stop here and ask everyone to sort of think a little bit about how you would think about an unidentified flying object. Is this something you think we should fear? Is this something that you think we should celebrate? Is this something that you actually think there are aliens or not aliens? Or what are all the thoughts that you have around this? Now, after that, I want to point out what this scientist, or what my recollection of this scientist actually said. Like a true scientist, he said, well, we don't actually know what this is. And that kind of stunned people on the panel. And they're saying, well, it's an unidentified flying object. And the scientist is essentially saying, yes, but what does that mean? When we think of an unidentified flying object, all that really means is an unidentified flying object. And do we even know it's a flying object? Is this some kind of phenomena that is only seen, some kind of aerial phenomena that's only seen every so often? Is this something that can be explained through natural consequences? How are we seeing this thing? And even if it is sort of an unidentified flying object, how do we go about automatically making assumptions that there's agency behind this? In other words, he was pointing out that you see an unidentified flying object and you immediately think there's this little green Martian guy flying this spaceship. And if you're the military guy, you think he's going to try to blow us up or he's spying on us or something. All the scientist was essentially saying is, we don't know. To assume this is something from an other world is not an assumption we can yet make. To assume there's something flying this thing is not an assumption we can yet make. All we can say is this is an unidentified flying object. And so essentially what he was saying was, we don't actually know what this is. It is interesting. It certainly seems to have certain characteristics that might make it a particular technology. It goes against certain physics and things like that, but we don't actually know what it is. So let's take the time to understand what it is, ask the right questions, and don't make these huge assumptive leaps about what this might be. Now, this might be shocking to you, but to me, this is the way to do good thinking. It's to essentially say, what are all the assumptions I am making, right? Even if this is from an other world or another race or something like that, do we assume there's someone flying this? How do we know it's not remote controlled? How do we know it's, not some drone-like thing, right? And so the idea is, if you want to think in a good way and do good thinking, you want to be agnostic in your thought processes. You want to be scientific in your thought process. In other words, you don't want to hold on to any preconceived notions and assumptions. You want to just say, what do we know? All we know is that we don't know what this thing is. And then let's start from there and say, well, what else do we know? Does it move like an aircraft? Does it move like anything we know? Can we assume? Do we have proof there's someone sitting in a cockpit somewhere? What is this thing? Now, when most people hear this kind of thought process, they do not like it. And the reason they don't like it is because it brings up more questions than it provides answers. Now, if you're somebody who seeks power and certainty and stability, a base level mindset, you want power, certainty, and stability, you do not want to think about more questions. All you want to do is solve the thing right there. And in order to do that, you will actually just go ahead and make stuff up. Now, haven't we seen this with COVID? Right? Haven't we seen this? We've seen this idea that this thing, the rush to judgment to say that it came from bats, the rush to judgment to say that it came from a lab, the rush to judgment that it said that to say it was manufactured by our government. All these stories that come up. We don't know. We still don't know where this thing actually came from. But does it make sense? And it may, but does it make sense to just go ahead and make up all this stuff like it came from a lab and it was nefarious intent on the part of China and there is a big conspiracy with all the governments across the world to control all of us? And that's what this is about. This is what base level mindset does. It wants to fill in all the gaps when the reality is we simply do not know. And as we have started to study this and look deeply into this, some of these answers have been cleared up. By the way, the answer of where exactly this thing came from is unknown. We know it probably originated in bats, but we don't know whether this was in the lab being worked on and somehow escaped accidentally, or if it really came from a wet market, etc. So you can even see in the COVID crisis that we've been dealing with, these kinds of questions come up. Now, we may not know for some time. A base level mind wants to the certainty and stability of making things up. And this is not good thinking. This is poor thinking, actually. And it's also misinformation. It is irresponsible at best and immoral at worst. And I mean that when I say immoral at worst. You might say, well, Jade, why are you saying that? Because it can be very harmful. It can cause dehumanizing language towards China when perhaps this is not the case. When you start making things up, what ends up happening is you start to create and foment certain ideas that may be inaccurate and certain ideas that may cause fear, fear that goes into anger, anger that then becomes directed at certain individuals, certain groups, etc. Especially when the cultural level individuals get handed these ideas. That's why I say it is irresponsible at best and immoral at worst. Good thinking essentially says, I will not be in a position where I will spread falsehoods. Good humans spread good information, not false information. Good humans do not deal in conspiracy, conjecture, insinuation, and misleading information. They are essentially comfortable saying, I do not know. Just like this scientist talking about the UFO and reminding everyone on that particular panel that we actually don't know what this is. You are making a lot of assumptions about something that needs to be studied first. And people are not comfortable with that. Good humans, next level thinking, we do not, you do not, they do not let bias and dogma hijack their intellectual integrity. When we are doing it this way, we are operating from our next level selves. If we instead start to put assumptions on board, then we are in the base level state. And one way to think about this that I think is really useful is to think about the burden of proof that occurs in our judicial system. You cannot just point to somebody and say they did this particular crime. People are assumed innocent until proven guilty. There is a burden of proof. There has to be a situation where evidence is presented to prove the veracity of the conclusions or the veracity of the crime. You can't just say you did this and then everyone agrees, although this can happen all the time, doesn't it? It certainly happens where people are presumed guilty instead of presumed innocent. And when that happens, it is always, always, always a travesty. And so what we do as a society is we essentially say we will not be in a position, a civilized society, we will not be in a position where we convict individuals without proof. And we are certainly okay letting someone go, even if they committed the crime, but we cannot prove it because it is so appalling to us that we might actually convict and sentence someone to death or life sentence or prison who is innocent. And so the burden of proof is huge in our judicial system. And we need this same burden of proof in the way that we think. This is absolutely critical. So a good human thinks in a way that grows them. So here's one way to look at this. There's a quote by Osho. It goes like this: the less a human knows, the more stubbornly they know it. And I'll add to that and say the more a human knows, the more open-minded they know it. So part of good thinking is this idea that in order to know you don't know something, you have to know quite a lot about that thing to begin with. And so what ends up happening is you can actually telegraph your own ignorance and the ignorance of others by their inability to admit that they're wrong, by their inability to use terms like maybe, or it depends, or it could be, or maybe not, versus individuals who say it is absolutely this way, and they speak in such definitive terms that it should immediately make you suspect. Because most things, especially complex things, when we talk about things like metabolism, or we talk about things like politics, we talk about nutrition and health and science and all of these things, most things are difficult to understand. Let's take something like the idea of climate control. Think about all the people talking about and acting like they are experts in the climate, or in metabolism, or in nutrition, or in disease. And think about all the individuals who are experts in these fields, who study these things day in and day out, and look at the difference in the way these two individuals or these two groups speak. The true experts in a field are always very nuanced in their language, and always very careful in their language, and always saying maybe, and always saying more studies need to be done, or always saying it depends. And this language comes along with wisdom. The more you know, the more you know you don't know. The less you know, the more you think you know. And actually, psychology research has a name for this. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. I refer to it as the dunce effect for short. And it essentially says that the less someone knows about a subject, the more they think they know about that particular subject. And it's because they've never learned enough about that subject to actually understand the deep nuances of it. And it's a very biased type of approach too. The dunce effect has this sort of bias built in, where it essentially says, I am going to go and look for information that reaffirms my opinion. This is bad thinking. This is bad thinking in terms of not growing you, and bad thinking in terms of not good for society. Because what happens when you have enough people thinking badly, bad outcomes happen. Have you ever heard this statement that, good people operating from bad ideas can do terrible things? I don't know whose quote that is, but I love that quote. And what ends up happening is because most people are operating from the cultural level, and they tend to gravitate toward their particular team, if a team member or a team leader has a bad idea or is not a good thinker, and they start throwing out ideas for which there is no proof, conspiracy, conjecture, misinformation, what do you think happens with the rest of these culture level individuals who just look at popularity and are just trying to fit in? By the way, this is why base level humans oftentimes become leaders, because they are very definitive in their language. And when they build up a following, the culture level crowd becomes a chorus right behind them. And bad things can happen when we have that kind of approach. It's arguable that in the COVID crisis, we've seen this in several of our leaders across the board. Now, of course, depending on where you sit culturally and politically, you're going to point the finger at one side or the other, and you'll be doing exactly what the Dunning-Kruger or the Dunce effect says you would do, instead of realizing that you don't know much about virology. You don't know much about immunology. You don't study this stuff. You're not a PhD in virology and immunology, and most of you probably don't even have a degree in science. Now, is this to say you're dumb and can't think? No, absolutely not. But it is to say if you don't have an expertise in something, then you shouldn't be speaking on it. I'll give you an example. Right now, I have a brand new puppy. I have read about 4 different books on this because I'm like, ooh, knowledge. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got it figured out. Now, anybody who's owned a puppy and has had this experience, or a trainer of dogs who've owned many different types of puppies of many different breeds, already is probably smiling to themselves and knowing the folly in this, and essentially saying, read all the books you want, Jade, but until you actually have the experience, A, those books won't make a whole lot of sense, and B, you're not going to really know what you're talking about. And that's exactly the case. I thought I knew. I've never had a puppy. I was raised with dogs. My parents took care of them. I thought I knew what I was in for. And so I had a little bit of arrogance around the idea that, well, I knew. I read some books. Once now I have the dog, I get that I know absolutely nothing. So I was suffering from the dunce effect, and as it pertained to my puppy. Ask any parent who's being told how to raise kids by somebody who's never raised kids. We all know this is true, but then of course we start questioning climate scientists when we don't know jack shit, excuse my French, about climate science. Right? We don't know about virology. And this to me is the absolute ignorance and arrogance of thinking because you've read a few blogs, checked out a few tweets, follow a few health and fitness podcasters and are in the biohacking community and are in the alternative medicine community, or have seen a few cases of vaccine injury, that you know what you are talking about as it pertains to these concepts. I'm sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about, that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get. Almost like carrying around pure protein, low carb protein in your pocket. They also, these Paleo Valley beef sticks are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats, and they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. One, you're helping to support the podcast. And 2, you are helping your health. And 3, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted. And raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. PaleoValley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now back to the show. It's Dr. Jade Teta here, just breaking in real quickly. It is time to talk about one of our sponsors, our earliest sponsor, Cured Nutrition. This is a CBD company. Cured Nutrition is another one of those next level human companies that is doing amazing things in the world. Let me tell you a little bit about one of the things I've been doing with CBD here recently. There is some really interesting research showing that chronic cannabis users, these are people who are smoking marijuana, are actually down-regulating the cannabinoid 1 receptor. Well, guess what the cannabinoid 1 receptor is involved in? Well, it's involved in cravings and hunger. And there is some really interesting mouse research that shows mice given products that lower CB1 or being engineered with a lower CB1 activity actually eat less and are not obese as a result of that. And so I have been experimenting using CBD to lower hunger, to down-regulate the CB1 receptor, just the way chronic cannabis users tend to be very thin. And it has been working very well. Now, of course, the other thing that I use this for and have used it for since day one is Cured Nutrition has a product called Zen that is a mix of magnesium and CBD and some other really nice formulations in there that I use to help me sleep. I have notoriously bad sleep. My sleep still is not perfect, but the Cured Nutrition product Zen has made a big difference to helping me sleep better. And that is just huge. Now, of course, they have other products. They also have a product called Rise, which I do not use, but I have used in the past. It is great for those people who like to have a pick-me-up in the morning to focus better. So Zen and Rise are fantastic, but any of their CBD products used for downregulation of the CB1 receptor to help with hunger and cravings, if you're one of these people who is constantly overeating and on a diet, you find that, hey, when I'm on a diet, I get this crazy sort of hunger and cravings. This may be something you want to check out. So check out curednutrition.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. I get a kickback to help us have these discussions on the show. It's a great way for me to be able to do this work. So thank you for Cured Nutrition for that. Of course, Cured Nutrition gets the sale, and you get to work with a fantastic company that gets results with their supplements. I hope you will check them out. curednutrition.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now let's go ahead and get back to the show. Let's do it. I'm not really working off a script here as I'm having this conversation. I hope you don't mind, because normally when I do these podcasts, I am essentially, just going off the cuff and trying for us to have a conversation. So I just brought up vaccines. I wasn't planning on doing that, but let's talk a little bit about good thinking about that, since it's so prevalent on everyone's mind. There is something called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting Systems. Many of you may have heard of this, VAERS. One of the things that happens is a lot of people who are proponents of, who are anti-vaccine will use this VAERS system, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, as a way of showing the veracity of why vaccines are so horrible. Well, here's the interesting thing about this, and this is good thinking. When you have something like this, the first question you have to ask is, well, what are they measuring? Or what are we actually talking about here? This particular Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System basically takes calls from anybody. Anybody at all can essentially call this in and essentially say, I've had an adverse event from vaccines, right? So let's say, and actually I'm going to give you an actual case here. So I am aware of a 93-year-old frail woman who had the vaccine in Europe and essentially died shortly after, right? So they passed away about 5 days after getting the vaccine. Now, if you're an anti-vaxxer falling prey to your own biases, you're going to say the vaccine killed this particular woman. Well, she's 93 years old. She could have died at any moment between there. The idea that you're going to automatically claim that the vaccine killed this woman is problematic. Now, on the other side of that, the idea that you're going to absolutely claim 100% that the vaccine didn't kill this particular woman is also not a great idea. But someone who's 93 years old, good thinking, says that, okay, well, this woman died. She was going to die anyway. It was basically essentially any day now. Did the vaccine have anything to do with it? Maybe, maybe not. Do we see this in younger people? Not really. The chances, by the way, and this is, again, good thinking. You want to go and look and you go, okay, well, what are the actual documented cases of people dying from a vaccine? Well, here they are, 1 in 11 million. It's about 1 in 6 million, I believe, getting struck by lightning. And so what we want to do is we want to say, when we're doing good thinking, we want to go, well, those statistics are pretty much in favor of vaccines not causing this. Maybe this 93-year-old woman died of her own accord. Now, at the same time, we always want to leave open the possibility that there are aspects of vaccines that we don't know. Maybe the vaccines do some kind of damage that, we can't detect. Maybe they end up doing damage to people, 5 years down the line that we simply don't know about. But to get in that kind of conjecture when we know that a disease like polio, let's say, or measles, mumps, and rubella, let's say, or the latest one, SARS-CoV-2, let's say, is killing people in very high numbers, and we know that that's happening, then this is a risk that perhaps we can take. Now, this is not me saying I am for or against vaccines. Actually, I'll show you another aspect of good thinking. I am both pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine based on the case and the context and the person. For example, I have never gotten a flu vaccine because I regard the flu in risk for me as being extremely low for me having any sort of negative effects. Not to mention, I don't have a lot of people around me who have difficult immune issues or compromised immune systems that I'm around a lot that I could potentially infect with the flu. Next, the flu is always changing, and it's not as infectious and or deadly as something like SARS-CoV-2. And so I am not for someone saying you should be getting the flu vaccine all the time. The flu does kill individuals. Roughly about 60,000 people per year the flu kills. Now, contrast that with how many people have died from SARS-CoV-2, this new virus that we have. We're looking at somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 people now. Close to 500,000 people, I believe, is where we are in the United States right now. So when you ask me about that particular vaccine, I'm far more pro-vaccine there. Now, also, though, good thinking essentially says, let's not confuse arguments here. Being pro-vaccine for SARS-CoV-2, anti-vaccine for flu for me, and then caring about, let's say, health freedom and people being able to make their own choices are three different arguments. And so I can, for example, be against vaccine mandates and pro SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, meaning I would get one, I would advise you to get one, and I would advise my whole family to get one, and also be anti-flu vaccine except for certain people. So again, good thinking does not make me sort of fall prey to this all or nothing type approach. I can be very nuanced in my thinking. I can hold different ideas. I can hold health freedom as one idea and one conversation. I can hold vaccine science, which I'm not an expert in, but I'm probably more of an expert than the vast majority of you listening to this. And I know an awful lot about it. Part of my job actually at Metabolic Living is to keep up with this. I've been giving talks throughout this pandemic to different HR organizations, keeping them abreast of the science. So yes, I'm very much sort of in the trenches with it, but I'm by no means an expert in immunology and virology. But you can see I can hold different ideas all at the same time. Let's talk a little bit about masks and what's good thinking and bad thinking. Again, masks, do they work or not? Well, the true answer to that is it depends. And you might say, what do you mean, Jade? It depends. It depends on many things. For example, are we talking about my protection, the mask wearer, my protection to get the virus? Or are we talking about me having a stealth infection or not yet knowing I'm infecting, protecting someone else? Well, masks work far better when I'm wearing them to protect someone else than they do to protect me. Those are two different conversations. So good thinking says, let me ask you, if you're going to say masks work or don't work in the research, or you're going to take a stand, then I want to know, what are you talking about? Are you talking about it doesn't work to protect the wearer, or it doesn't work to protect others from the wearer? Because those are two different conversations. Also, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a hospital setting? Are we talking about a workplace setting? And are we talking about single layer cloth or multi-layer surgical masks? Are we talking about double masking? Are we talking about wearing these things all day long? Are we talking about being outside, etc.? And if you look at all of this, what you actually will find in the research right now, and again, good thinking essentially says in the research right now, I won't definitively tell you, even though it might bother you, whether masks definitely work in all cases or not. But I will say, based on my reading of the research, I think it is irresponsible at best and immoral at worst to go around saying masks do not work. Certainly, we know there are some issues with some masks. For example, single layer cotton masks may not at all protect the wearer from getting COVID, and we'll have to see, but probably do offer some protection from the wearer. But the idea is asking these questions. A good scientist will not just assume all masks work. They will ask the question of what masks work, when do they work, under what context do they work, so that in a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll all be sitting back and we'll get a very nuanced, better structured, better understanding about masks. So hopefully this conversation is helping you begin to think a little bit more clearly here. Instead of thinking base level, if you're thinking base level, as soon as I bring up masks or vaccines, you are either with me or against me. And culture level, for sure, you're just like, he's on my team or not. Well, my team is no team. Good thinking is thinking that essentially says, I don't know for sure, number one. Number two, I am perfectly happy being wrong and being corrected, number two. And number three, I'm not going to make definitive statements about this stuff, and I'll use the best information we currently have available from the experts who are doing this day in and day out, knowing even they can get this wrong. And this brings me up to another question about science. And I'll just read this because I'm just looking at this and I wanted to remind myself to bring this up. Here is a recent comment on a post of mine where I posted about scientists and science. And this person says, this is what they respond. They go, scientists are as easily bought as politicians. Studies can show whatever you want them to show. Now, this is so interesting in so many ways and illustrates good thinking from bad. So let me just read my response back to this really quickly, and then let's have a discussion before we wrap up this podcast. I said, this type of thinking says more about the human making the statement than the reality of that statement. Scientists and politicians can certainly be biased. But spreading the narrative that they are all money driven is inaccurate and wrong. And the benefit of science is that it checks against itself so that biased scientists and fabricated data are always discovered by the checks and balances of science. To not understand this is to be ignorant of the process of science in the first place and to act as if every politician and every scientist somehow has nefarious intent and use that as a justification to dismiss science is part of the problem, meaning that that's part of the problem. So what am I essentially saying here? I am essentially saying here something that I think might be a little triggering to some of you, but please, the whole point of the Next Level Human podcast is to help us be better humans and think better. So on good thinking, here's what I want you to understand, and I'll use a very embarrassing thing that I am somewhat ashamed of and am not proud of: my affair and my divorce and the whole sort of story around that. So for those of you who don't know, I fell in love with another woman while I was with my wife. Now, my wife and I are still incredibly great friends. My ex-wife and I are still incredibly great friends, partly because of what happened after the fallout of this. Now, the point here is that I was not obviously the most honest person. My sort of way of honesty, dealing with honesty, I was very much a people pleaser, which is a form of dishonesty. I wasn't necessarily an outright liar, or at least I didn't see myself like that until I cheated and did this. But I was a people pleaser. So people pleasing is a form of dishonesty. And what I now know is that that form of dishonesty crept into dishonesty in lots of different places in my life. I wouldn't tell people exactly how I felt. I would pretend I felt differently. I would hold certain things back, all of this kind of stuff. Now, here is the point. At that time, when I had this sort of complicated relationship with honesty, I did not trust anyone. Now, I wasn't aware at the time, but why would I trust someone when I'm not the most trustful person? So if I'm not trustful, obviously I'm going to trustworthy. Obviously, I'm going to make the assumption that you're not trustworthy. If I'm telling you things that you just want to hear and not being authentic, then I'm going to assume you're not being authentic. And this is how I operated. If you gave me a compliment, I assumed that you were just saying that. If you said, you were going to do something for me, I didn't believe you and certainly didn't trust you and didn't put any faith in you. Why? Because I didn't put much faith in myself. Now, what's interesting is I, after all of that, have made honesty my religion. And what interestingly happened is I started to see that now I trust people. I trust people pretty much right off the bat. Why? Because I know I'm trustworthy. I don't think people lie to me because I know I don't lie. I don't see people as having nefarious intent because I don't have nefarious intent. Here's the thing. I'm rich. I have money. I have been able to do really well. I'm rich by most people's standards, right? So from my perspective, I know what it would be like to have a couple more $1 million, right? And that wouldn't make me dishonest. It wouldn't make me nefarious. It wouldn't make me want to chase power. It would just make me more of who I am, which is generous and kind. And so when I'm thinking, I don't think that a billionaire wants another $1 billion. I don't want another $1 million. What I want to do is spread my message. I want to spend my time on this podcast. If I want another $1 million, it's so I can do more good work and share it with you and do more charity and give more money to the organizations that I give money to, right? So the idea, for example, that someone like a Bill Gates wants another $1 million to control you and has nefarious intent doesn't even enter my mind. What I see is here's a billionaire. He could do whatever the hell he wanted. He chooses to start a foundation and help attack HIV and AIDS and help eradicate malaria and put his monetary resources into bettering humanity. He doesn't have to do any of that. So I don't see him as wanting to make another $1 billion. And the reason I bring this up is because good thinking comes from the stories and the way we think. Dishonest people think everyone's dishonest. People who have grown up with narratives around money that rich people are bad think that anyone that has money is doing bad things. So part of thinking good and good thinking to grow yourself and better the world is to ask yourself, why do I think that? And what proof do I have? And is it responsible or moral to pretend you know that a rich person just wants more money to be greedy? Couldn't the opposite also be true? Now, by the way, I'm not saying that's not the case. But what I am saying is, as soon as you make that assumption that it's all about nefarious intent, as soon as you think the vaccine adverse events reporting system, you're using that to justify you being against vaccines, and you don't ask the question, well, anyone can call into this thing. Anyone can, make a report here. We don't know if it was the 93-year-old woman who just passed away from old age, or if this was a kid who happened to have peanuts, an allergic reaction to peanuts near when he had the vaccine. We don't know that kind of stuff. We have to be very careful about making assumptions about things because we already believe a thing. We humans, very bad thinking is we will have an opinion and we will simply just go around trying to prove our opinion instead of asking questions. And this brings up another point here, right? People go, well, I'm just a question asker. Agreed. I'm a skeptic. Agreed. So am I. Everyone should be. But being a skeptic and asking questions is very, very different than insinuating nefarious intent or outright claiming nefarious intent. That is actually dangerous and it's dehumanizing. And we do know from research that as soon as you start using dehumanizing language against other humans, you end up causing increased dehumanizing language and violence down the road. So you might ask, right now, as I'm giving this, we're seeing a spike in violence over the last several months of attacks on Asians, violence against Asians. Well, is it any surprise, given that some base level leaders, and I'll just call him out here, Donald Trump, he's certainly not all bad, but in this particular case, he did use dehumanizing language, the sort of kung flu and these kinds of things, which some people might laugh and say that's funny. It is dehumanizing. It opened up dehumanizing language towards other Asians. And then this has violent effects down the line. Now, I will purposely say right here on this show, and I'm not shy about it, I despise Donald Trump, not because he is Republican. As a matter of fact, I wish we had some really good Republicans, because I also despise the Democrats. But I don't find Donald Trump at all a person that I find a good human or who does good thinking, because he deals in conspiracy and conjecture and dehumanizing language. This is why I don't find him a good human and see him as a base level leader. Now, again, if you're a culture level human, you either like me or don't like me. But let me be clear. This is done on the other side as well. We have got to hold our leaders, both Democrats and Republicans or anywhere, to the standard of being a good human and doing good thinking and not dealing in conjecture and conspiracy and dishonesty. And I'll basically follow up and end this particular podcast with the following. If we want to think good and do good thinking, to grow ourselves and evolve the world in a next level, to be in more of our next level state instead of our base level state, what we need to do is we need to begin to cultivate agnostic scientific thinking. So what is agnostic scientific thinking? It essentially is a thought process that says, I am not going to overly tie myself to any particular opinions or ideas. And when I have a particular opinion, for example, about someone like a Donald Trump, I don't know Donald Trump personally. For all I know, he may be a fantastic human and a wonderful friend and all the things. My opinion is, based on what I have seen, that he is not. And by the way, his entire presidency, my agnostic thinking was constantly trying to give this man the benefit of the doubt. In my way of looking at it, the evidence is in on him, especially after the January 6th event. Now, I know some of you don't agree with me, and some of you are even getting upset at the even mention of politics. And this is on purpose. I am mentioning this on purpose. It's one of the little things I said, make sure you cover this. Because to be an agnostic and a scientific thinker means one thing first, that nothing is off topic. We must be able to talk about things. Truth comes from my perspective, my sort of reality, the way I perceive reality, merging with the way you perceive reality. And when you tell me your reality and your evidence and the way you think about something, and I present my reality and my evidence and the way I think about something, my reality checks your reality and your reality checks my reality. And a more perfect truth emerges out of that. Now magnify that times 10 people. And now you have an even more nuanced, better truth. And by the way, this is what science does. Science is the process that checks your truth. One scientist does a study, another scientist checks his truth. Now magnify this times thousands. So one single scientist might falsify data. Guess what happens? All the other scientists find out because they're trying to reproduce his studies. They are checking each other. Science is a checks and a balance system. So this idea that all science is falsified is absolutely garbage. It's simply not true. As a matter of fact, it shows a level of ignorance about science that is astounding. Science is the very process by which we fight against bias and dogma. A scientist can absolutely be biased. A single scientist can absolutely falsify data. We've seen this happen. Guess what happens? They get ostracized from their profession. Everyone finds them out. They become a pariah in the science circles. This is what science does. And this process, yes, takes time. Good thinking takes time. All of us are going to be wrong, very, very wrong in some way, shape, or form in regards to COVID, let's say. I'm going to be very wrong. Things that I have shared with you, you're going to say, I remember Jade said that and he was wrong. And that's the way science works. I am perfectly okay with being wrong because that means we're getting further to the truth. The idea is, are you okay being wrong about masks? Are you okay about being wrong about SARS-CoV-2? Are you okay being wrong about your favorite politician? You know, right now in the United States, for those, I know I have a lot of listeners overseas, but right now this would be Biden on the Democratic side and Trump on the Republican side. Are you okay looking at both of them and holding them to a standard? I am certainly no Democrat or Republican, and I held Trump to a standard of good thinking and a moral standard that is my own, and I will hold Biden to that same standard. Intellectual integrity, kindness, being a good human. I don't care. I'm for good humans and good ideas wherever they come from. And I myself aspire to do good thinking. And so if we're going to do good thinking, we want to be in a position where we are agnostic. We do not attach to ideas. We attach to the process of discovering truth. That means we don't claim something is definitive. Instead, we leave open the possibility that we are completely wrong. And when it comes to science around nutrition, and when it comes to politics, and when it comes to things like this virus we're all dealing with, and complicated economics and all these things, and climate science, we are all going to be more wrong than we are right. But the consensus slowly builds. For example, we don't yet anymore have to question gravity. We don't anymore have to question that the earth is round unless you're insane, like some people. We don't have to question that. We have undeniable truth as to this. Unless you are, off your rocker and thinking the entire world is trying to convince you that the world is flat. And I mean that in a sense. In a sense, I hesitate to use language like that because in a sense, it's dehumanizing. And so I'm violating my own rule there. So we always have to watch ourselves. But certain things like gravity, like the earth being round, science is definitive on. Other things like nutritional science and weight loss and certain politics. And by the way, wouldn't it be nice if we had an evidence-based politic instead of your opinion or my opinion, the opinion of the left thinking that we have to spread the wealth and the opinion on the right that says markets, only work, and all these opinions? Wouldn't it be great if we could test this stuff out? Shouldn't we have an evidence-based politic? This is what this podcast is all about. Good thinking requires that we think more holistically, that we understand that we can have multiple conversations at the same time, that we don't go black and white, that we wade through the gray, that we can handle these different ideas, that instead of merging them all into one, that we can avoid being base level, trying to just win and exercise power, and we can avoid culture level thinking where we just jump on our team and instead really ask the important questions without insinuating that we know the answer. This is what I want you to be thinking about with this podcast. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I will see you at the next podcast. Talk to you soon.